Hi, everyone. Today, we're tackling a challenge that's reshaping the data center ecosystem. As demand for digital services surges, so does the need for data centers. But we all know the elephant in the room, available power. The ability to secure enough electricity and secure it quickly is becoming one of the biggest hurdles that data center leaders face. What used to be a routine utility matter is now delaying projects and shaping billion-dollar decisions. Bloom Energy recently put together a data center power report, which you will all receive in the attendee resources. Reading through it, I learned that data centers will require more than 35 gigawatts of new power in the next 5 years. So we're all starting to ask some very big questions. How are data center operators navigating this challenge? How's it reshaping their strategies? And how might on-site power, from fuel cells to distributed generation, become a core part of their solutions? So the answers to these big questions have become essential for those tasked with powering the AI-driven, power-hungry world that we live in. And today we have two leaders from American Electric Power and Bloom Energy here to unpack what it means and how the industry is adapting. So I want to welcome Joel Jansen is the Senior Vice President of Regulated Commercial Operations and Senior Vice President of Energy Assets at American Electric Power, where he oversees financial, physical, and operational strategies for AEP's regulated energy portfolio. Then Kevin Pasalacqua is the Vice President of Structured Finance at Bloom Energy, where he leads strategic growth initiatives, partnerships, and financial structuring to support the company's expansion in clean energy. So, with more than 2 decades of experience in finance and energy, Kevin has played a key role in advancing innovative financial models that make sustainable power more accessible. Before we get started, for everyone, a quick note. You're welcome to drop questions in the chat at any time during this session. We'll save time at the end for Q&A to try to answer as many of them as we can. So thank you all for joining us, and let's dive in. Joel, first question is to you. AEP is one of the nation's largest generators of electricity. How are you thinking about addressing this surge in power demand? Can you tell us about your business, your strategy, and what led you to turn to on-site power to generate and deliver electricity?
Sure. Happy to be with you. Maybe first what we'll do is we'll go through a little bit of who AEP is. As you said, AEP is one of the largest generators of electricity in the United States. Our service territories of our vertically integrated utilities, we really stretch from Texas up to Michigan. And across that, we're in 11 different states providing regulated utility operations to all of our customers. And we recognize revenue from our customers through retail and wholesale electric sales, as well as the distribution and transmission of that power across the country. That is our core business. We've been around for over 100 years, and you can see some of the statistics on your screen there about the size and scale that AEP provides. We are excited about the growth that is coming to our country around data centers and the opportunities that provides us to be able to meet the challenges that this new load provides to the utility framework. Remember, we've been generating electricity for over 100 years, and so this growth is something we've dealt with before. It's been a few years though, and so as part of that, you have to sort of start reevaluating the sources that you have and the needs that you have of that growing enterprise, and make sure that you're working in lockstep with each other to make sure that you have the generation to meet that load at all times, as reliability remains an important part, and we want to keep the lights on for all our customers. And so at AEP, we're deploying certainly an all of the above solution for meeting our customer needs. We sit down and take the time to meet with our customers, with our legislators, with our commissions, to make sure that we're working on the things that they view as most important and solving the problems that our customers have. And certainly right now, one of those challenges that we'll be digging into later here has been the availability of generation and of transmission in the very near term. And that's where we've been working with the Bloom team on an innovative solution.
Awesome. All right, well, Kevin, tell us, how does Bloom fit into the conversation, particularly when it comes to AI power demands?
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. So just as a quick level set, for those of you that may not be familiar with Bloom Energy. We are an OEM. We are a solid oxide fuel cell manufacturing company. It is important to note that what fuel cells do is we take in a feedstock, either hydrogen or methane slash natural gas, and we convert that into electricity. So we do get questions every now and then. Are you a battery? We are not a battery. We are a electric generating asset. We operate in a steady state mode and we run 24/7, 365. So we don't have scheduled downtime or maintenance. Our goal is to constantly produce a steady state of power for our customers. Not many people know it, but we've been around for coming up on 25 years. We've got over 1.4 gigawatts deployed across 1,200 different customer sites. The data center space is not new to us. We have over 300 megawatts deployed at data centers, recently announcing that we passed the 100 megawatt threshold with Equinix. When you start to think about data centers and the additional growth that's coming, Melissa, we've highlighted that in this report, the total data center IT load lifetime to date through the end of 24 is 25 gigawatts. And when you start to look at what the announced projects are over the next 5 years, plus the forecast, which is another 35 megawatts, and I think Morgan Stanley actually just updated this to 42 megawatts, so the numbers keep growing rapidly. We're talking about increasing data center demand by 2 to 4x in the next 5 years. So the first 25 gigawatts really exhausted the current electric infrastructure, and then we're going to increase that 2 to 4x. It's going to be challenging. One thing that's unique about Bloom is that we have a modular architecture. So our form factor is 325 kilowatts. And then so we can take that and we can deploy it in a 5 megawatt configuration, a 50 megawatt configuration, 200 megawatts. It's just like putting Legos together. And that is really attractive as you think about data centers, because whether you have a big data center or a small data center, our technology can complement it well in terms of providing it the power that it needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. So Joel, I want to dive into this because, utilities and data centers are getting a lot closer together in how we operate. And, so sometimes I think people can hear the term distributed generation, but not fully understand it and what it means for us. So can you help with defining that and explaining how utilities see that as part of their comprehensive energy strategy?
Sure, I guess I could have done my research on what the Webster's definition of distributed generation is, but in my world, distributed generation refers to, the process of locating generation, small scale power sources near the load, near the point of the usage. And so that's going to be beneficial in that you'll be able to control some of the resources there. You'll also be able to have, hopefully a little bit better hands-on. If you're a hands-on sort of individual or hands-on company, you'll be able to have that hands-on approach to it. But it is typically smaller scale, and the real key is that it's co-located or really near the place where it's being consumed. The challenge for distributed generation is that if you're using it at your site, that's fine. But if you want to connect into the grid, that becomes a little bit more challenging, because now we're talking about a grid that's flowing two ways. And the grid has not been typically designed to flow two ways. It's being worked on, and there's lots of studies being done. But that's always been one of the challenges with distributed generation, is this idea that we're going to have lots of people plugging into this ambiguous sort of system, taking generation and taking load. And so one of the challenges that we have as a utility is we typically want to make sure that these distributed generation resources are going to be operated in a very safe and equitable way for all customers. And so that's why when we've built out the AEP network over the past 100 years, we've typically done it with electricity at large central facilities that deliver electricity to customers over, our transmission and distribution facilities to customers within our franchise area. And that method was historically always resulted in the best economies of scale, usually the lowest cost, and was most beneficial for our customers that demanded the energy. I think what's happened is that over time, what we've seen is more challenges, more needs on the grid, and more challenges from our customers that we have to then propose alternative solutions. And I think that's sort of the nexus or the point of where we're at right now is, have we gotten to that spot where the historical model needs to be, reviewed and see if that's still the best case. But fundamentally at AEP, we still believe that the long term, the growth, the strength of the grid is there and is going to be very supportive. It's just a matter of, are there unique one-off solutions where distributed generation may make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, just continuing to explain some of what you're doing, I know utilities like AP are actively working to expand grid capacity, but new transmission, new generation, they both still take time. Can you walk us through some of what's involved in bringing that new power online and tell us more about all the careful planning, the forward-looking strategies, everything you're employing to support this?
Sure. Yeah. Bringing on new generation is quite a process. We are, and as I spoke about earlier, AEP is consistently engaged with regulators, policymakers around the decisions that we make and we contemplate for generation resources that are uh, reflected to our various states and commissions and jurisdictions that we support. Um, we do embrace, new generation resources, whether they be low carbon, whether they be distributed generation, but we're always there to sort of we're there working for the benefit of our customers, for our regulators. And so we do have an active engagement with those folks to make sure that we hear their challenges, we hear their problems, we hear what they desire, and we find ways to make those needs happen. So what we do is we have those conversations. Those conversations spark the challenges that then the AEP team works collectively to try to solve and come up with the right solutions that meet those needs. And whether that's nuclear, whether that's distributed generation, or anything in between, that's what we're working to do. But then we have to start to plan for that. So that takes a lot of our engineering and technical teams. We then develop IRPs, or basically our planning for what our customers need. We have to run through that process with all of our customers to make sure that everything that we're delivering to them meets their needs. And then we also run to our financiers and make sure we raise the necessary funding to be able to make sure we deliver the value to our shareholders and to our customers of what they expect out of the delivery of resources to them.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, okay. So, Kevin, given the scale of that demand, and with a lens on data centers, how can distributed generation help complement the utility efforts and thereby ensure that the data centers can secure power while the grid expansion is underway?
Sure. So I think Joel did a great job of highlighting all the stakeholders that are involved as part of, grid expansion. We've all heard it. There's a lot of places are delayed right now. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, and it makes sense when you think of the number of people and approvals that are required. As Joel mentioned, right, AP's been in business for over 100 years, and they've been investing in the grid for that entire time period. A key item to think about is the grid was originally designed to support an analog economy, right? And we've now transitioned to a digital economy, and you need a different solution set and a different way to serve customers. So one of the great things about distributed generation is when you site it at the customer, on the customer premise, you can avoid a lot of that infrastructure and a lot of those approvals that Joel was talking about, because you can keep everything contained to the customer site. So that allows you to remove a lot of the long lead items. It then allows you to help balance out and have a blended solution from, maybe some power coming from the grid and some power coming from on-site generation. I think the other thing that we're starting to see now is with data centers, the scale for distributed generation is approaching what you would normally do for utility scale development. So when Bloom first started getting going, a lot of our early projects were 500 kilowatts to a megawatt, because we were serving a lot of our retail customers. now in having conversations with the data centers, we're discussing utility scale projects. Like people routinely ask us, can we do 200 megawatts? Can we do 500 megawatts? We even had a customer recently ask us about, can we deploy a gigawatt on their campus? So I think as you're starting to look at like these needs growing exponentially, you've kind of got to rethink how to take an analog asset and convert it into a digital asset, and you need to have new solutions to do that.
Yeah, you do. I mean, the scale is really incredible, um, and I think you've both kind of thrown out the term or mentioned nuclear already. So we've seen a lot of announcements recently in the news about investments or takeoff agreements with small modular reactor companies. So I kind of want to hear from you both on this, like crystal ball it. When do you expect to see SMRs come online? How do they fit into that larger distributed gen landscape?
Sure, I'll go first. I mean, at AEP, we are, embracing the, the concept of advanced low carbon generation, which can include, early stage projects like small modular reactors. I think we've announced opportunities both in Virginia and in Indiana to perhaps bring small modular reactors to some sites there in those states, and we're active in trying to seek the necessary U.S. Department of Energy support in those permitting processes. The timelines to complete these projects, though, are into the future. And so while we are always looking at sort of the pace of growth that we're seeing for the demand of power right now, and it's moving at a pace that we haven't seen in decades, we also are always planning for that next generation. And AEP's been an industry leader in bringing the next generation of power to customers, and so our involvement in nuclear stems from that. Is that not only are we working to meet their current needs, we're also looking to sort of meet their potential growth needs into the future. So, it's definitely a 2030 timeline plus, but it just depends on what variation and the exact timing when we can kind of achieve some of the permitting and achieve some of the funding that we need to move that forward.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on Joel's point, it is one of those technologies where people are targeting 2030 to 2035 for getting the first round of projects in the ground. It is important to note, and something that Bloom experienced, which is the electric market and the electric regulatory framework has been around for over 100 years. Now, when you're a new technology and you're trying to plug into this existing market, it can be challenging getting all the right people educated, right? From regulators to HJs to even just the fire marshal. So while nuclear as a whole has been around for a while, doing small modular reactors on a distributed basis, there will be a lot of education required to make sure that all the different peoples in the right neighborhoods and the right states understand exactly what the technology is, what the benefits are, and what the risks are as you think about deploying those assets. So, we need all potential solutions, but there's a lot of education that will have to happen to enable these technologies.
Mm. Yeah, there is. There is. Well, some of that education, I kind of wanted to ask you, Kevin, what are the biggest advantages and misconceptions of I'm sorry, were you? Oh,
No, I'm
um,
sorry.
the, the advantages and misconceptions of distributed generation for data centers, especially when it comes to getting the power online faster and staying stable and reliable while we're waiting on the grid upgrades.
Sure. So, a handful of advantages. I do think probably one of the top ones is it has to do with both real and perception, which is when you deploy distributed generation and you co-locate it at a customer site, it's very clear to be able to ring fence the cost of the
Mhm.
generation with the customer that's using it. So you can kind of move away from a conversation, which is, are the general ratepayers, right, all the homeowners in an area subsidizing costs for the data centers, right? I do think that becomes a big topic where people look at spare capacity disappearing and they're wondering, how's this impacting my bills? Being able to deploy the generation at a customer site and being able to allow them to energize their data center, call it 3 to 10 years sooner, there's a lot of additional revenue that can be generated during that time period. So, if if you're a co-location data center and you're able to start, collecting on your lease payments years ahead of time, that's tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's a lot of value there. If you're a hyperscaler, right, and you're trying to develop AI language models, you don't really have the luxury of waiting 3 to 10 years to get more power to develop your models. Like, the world will pass you by and you'll never be able to catch up. A final key element is when you do distributed generation in the modular architecture, it allows you to kind of, pay as you grow, right? So if you're going to build, say, for example, a gigawatt data center, you don't just suddenly turn on a full gigawatt data center overnight. And what you can do is you can step into that power, call it 50 or 100 megawatts over time, like every quarter, as you go ahead and as you stand up buildings and as you populate the data hall. So it's a much more cost-effective solution. Some of the key misconceptions is that distributed generation isn't really designed to handle some of these large loads. Like when we're talking hundreds of megawatts to a gigawatt, I often get the question, Kevin, how many 300 megawatt projects do you have? And candidly, the answer is 0 because the demand hasn't been there before. Like we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that overlap. But we're at the point now where a lot of people are wanting to build data centers and they need that generation, and we can deliver that. The other thing is the misconception is around cost. And a lot of times when people are looking to compare cost, they're looking at what the status quo is and getting power off a fully amortized asset. So what you really have to think about is if you're going to build net new generation and you're going to build net new transmission and distribution, what's that cost? Because that really is the right comparison point for what the cost of power will be at your facility.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's critical.
All right, and sorry, Melissa, one final point is, so we do have a quick video to highlight. We have an existing manufacturing customer, and what they needed was they wanted to build out another part of their manufacturing facility, and the
Wow. Well, I think you got cut off there, so I want to give you a second to finish that. But 86 days time to power is impressive. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the exciting thing for us was, we went from contract signing to power up in 6 months. Right? So we were able to work and get all the approvals in place within 3 months. And then as you just saw, once we had the go ahead, we were able to land the assets and get them powered up in another 3 months. So it's a great example for how quickly distributed generation can move.
Well, thank you for sharing that. All right, so Joel, some might think that the utilities like AEP and on-site power providers like Bloom are technically competitors, but here you are partnering, and I love seeing this. So can you tell everyone here, tell me how this partnership came to be, why you chose to work with Bloom?
Sure. So what we did is we listened to our customers, as I described earlier, and what we were hearing from our customers were challenges and concerns and problems as it related to getting the necessary power that they needed to continue to grow in our service territories, as well as to get not just the amount, but also the speed by which they could get that power, as they wanted to grow now and they wanted to grow in some very sizable chunks. And so it was with that we started to do a bit of a research project within AEP after hearing that and trying to solve that problem, is identify, well, what are the kind of key criteria? We ranked all the various technologies, combustion turbines, reciprocating engines, batteries, other renewable technologies, fuel cells, and various types of fuel cells. And what we did is we ranked them and did a big due diligence across all the different technologies. And we ranked them on speed to power, high reliability, cost effectiveness, and their cleanliness, basically the permittability. And the reason that we chose those four key tenets as being the reasons that we wanted to make a decision around is those were what we heard from our customers as being the most important and what would help them make the best decision. And so after doing that science project, if you will, for a couple months, we determined that Bloom was the premier sort of solution here. And it really had to do a lot with that speed to power, which you already saw the video about, but also about their reliability. All these customers need to have very secure and reliable power, and they can't have too much of it, because one of the things that I think that goes misunderstood about distributed generation is that in these spots where there's challenges on the grid, it's not that they can always just push that extra power that they're going to make back to the grid. The grid may not be able to handle it, and so you need to be able to meet the customer's needs without just making way too much, because now you're talking about getting an interconnect position with the regional transmission operator, which can take years, and that blows up your sort of whole speed to power concept. So you got to be able to meet the needs, but not overshoot and not undershoot, and you got to be reliable. And that combination across the technologies really scored well for Bloom, and that's why we entered into the relationship that we had. It also helped that we had a history with Bloom. We had done a couple pilot projects back probably 5 years ago, just as we had done with we own gas turbines, we own reciprocating engines, but we had a history that we were able to kind of look upon to make sure that we weren't just trusting Kevin's team's comments and words, but we actually had data to back up that we knew what it could do and what it was capable of. So that combination is what led us to finding ways to work together.
Wow. Well, thank you for telling us all of that background and the impressive work you've been doing together. So to Kevin, I know Bloom produces distributed generation through fuel cells as a solution. So can you explain how fuel cells work that make them particularly well suited for data center customers?
Sure thing. I'm a finance guy, so for anyone that's on the phone that's an engineer or scientist, please don't hold it against me. So as I mentioned earlier, we use either hydrogen or natural gas as our feedstock. An important element of fuel cells is that we don't burn the fuel. We electrochemically react it. So we go straight from chemical energy to electrical energy, and we do that by taking methane, we mix it with steam that reforms it down into CO and H2. We pass that on one side of our fuel cell, we pass air on the other, oxygen ions transport through it, and we capture the electrons and we export those to the building. Because we don't burn the fuel, we have very clean byproducts. We have heat, water, and a little bit of CO2. So as Joel talked about permitting, one of the benefits is that we produce negligible amounts of SOx, NOx, PM10. So if you can kind of remember back to the early part of COVID, when all of a sudden you could see the skyline in downtown Los Angeles and you had air quality in New Delhi, that's what it's like when you don't have combustion. So we're able to site our assets in neighborhoods where most places you wouldn't be able to do a typical combustion type technology. So that gives data centers a lot more flexibility to think about where they want to be. The other thing that's unique about our technology, and it fits really well with data centers, is that our modular architecture is based off of a data center design, right? So in a data center, you've got thousands and thousands of servers. If something happens to one of the servers, the rest of them keep running. You pop out the compute server and you put a new one. It's the exact same way with our energy servers. So if I'm going to do a large data center of 100, 200 megawatts, I'll have my base building block is 65 kilowatts, and I'll have hundreds of those at a customer site. One of those could go down, and I can pop it out and replace it within 2 hours, and there's no impact in terms of the amount of power that's delivered to the data center. So our core architecture and reliability is exactly the same approach that data centers use today. The other thing that a fuel cell is well suited to handle is load following, right? So as the loads fluctuate during the day at a data center, we're able to adjust our output to match it on a one-to-one basis. That's really important, for Joel's point, which is if you're constrained from a transmission perspective, you can't bring in more power when the loads fluctuate. And then the same thing is if you can't put power back onto the grid, I can't just produce it a flat block and take that extra production and put it back out onto the grid. So it allows us to really marry up the fuel cell production with the consumption at the facility.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, so Joel, can you tell us some of the potential you're seeing for fuel cells in supporting utilities like yours as they modernize infrastructure, diversify generation mix, all of it?
Yeah, so it's much the same of what I said earlier in that we're working directly with our regulated, in our vertically integrated utility jurisdictions, working with customers and hearing what their challenges are. And now that we have a technology sort of arranged with Bloom, we have the ability to offer that as a solution. It's a one of many different solutions that we have to offer. We think it does meet the needs for the various reasons that I outlined before. But I think the key is that we've got a distributed solution that can help them solve those needs around speed to power, around cleanliness, around economies of scale, around reliability. We can help them get to those things in a way that we didn't have a solution for, a year ago. We now have that, and we can offer that in a cost-effective way through our safe harbor purchase there. So we're working with our customers to meet what their needs are. And we think it fits very well in our portfolio of assets because at AEP, as we've talked about SMR all the way down to fuel cells, we are a true believer of sort of an all of the above solution set, that it does take all this growth that we're seeing that we've talked about as being, the largest in decades. This isn't going to get solved with only one technology or only one fuel source or only one arrangement. This is going to take an all of the above, and we all need to kind of lean in. And I think the Bloom technology scratches an itch for us and for our customers that we're happy to provide to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, all right. So Kevin, I know we have a lot of finance expertise here on this call. So when folks weigh the economics of distributed generation, how should they think about both the cost and the speed to power?
Sure. And I think, we get this question often, and I think there's a couple of ways to approach it. One is you can't just look at the cost sort of in a vacuum, right? You have to also look at the value that's being delivered. So that's where we talk about, if you can energize your data center 12 months sooner, 3 years sooner, 10 months sooner, there's a lot of value associated with that, right? So if you're a land developer, if you're a co-location facility, there's high carrying costs just to have that land or have that building sitting empty. If you're a hyperscaler and whether you're doing AI or you're doing cloud services, we all know those are high margin businesses, right? I think everyone looks at Amazon and you look at AWS and you can see AWS is a small part of revenue, but an outsized portion of Amazon's profit. So you want to get those types of businesses online as quickly as possible. So really, you want to get the cost, you want to get the value, and then the other thing you want to look at is really what's the total cost of ownership with the data center, right? So we talk about the power, but then you have to think about what's the cost to build the center, to build the data center. What's the cost to outfit it with all the IT equipment, to do an IT refresh every 4 to 5 years? So when you step back and you look at the total cost of ownership, power is maybe 6% over the lifetime of a data center. Maybe it goes to 7 or 8% when you're using distributed generation. So it goes up a little bit, but for the amount of revenue and margin you can generate, it just far outweighs any incremental cost that you'd potentially incur.
All right, great. Well, thank you both. I want to thank you for your time answering all of my questions. And now it's the audience's turn. And I know a ton of questions have already come in. So we're going to try to get to as many of these as possible. And while the rest of you are sending in your inquiries, let's take some of those ones that came in during the early webcast. So this first one is for Kevin. If someone wanted to work with Bloom through AEP, where would they start? What's the process and what does a typical agreement structure look like?
Sure. So I'll start it off, but really, I think this is a question for Joel to answer, and I think it's important for our customers to hear that when you're working with Bloom and AEP, it will be an AEP contract and on AEP paper. So your counterparty will be the utility, right, which has been your trusted partner for 100 years. So maybe Joel, you could kind of take through and explain to people how they can engage with AEP and contract with you.
Yeah. So the way, so the way we contract is you're going to enter into a unique arrangement, a special contract, a standalone arrangement. Hearing a little bit of background there. I'm not. All right, there we go. The way we contract is going to be directly with our regulated operating companies, and we're going to enter into a unique arrangement or a special contract or sort of a one-off arrangement that we're going to be able to make sure that the data center customer, because this distributed generation asset will not be for the benefit of all regulated customers inside that jurisdiction. It will be a one-on-one sort of relationship. And so because of that, we'll have to do it as a special contract where the customer is ultimately responsible for all of the cost, the obligations associated with that investment. And we'll deal with that. It will be based on sort of the contract term will be based on the duration that the customer feels comfortable with, looking for whatever that bridge term is until they can get, reliable and safe and economic grid energy. And we'll be the ones responsible for all the operations. We'll be responsible for the maintenance and the care. We'll be working with Kevin and the Bloom team to ensure everything gets built, permitted, and operates in a safe and clean way. So you'll be dealing with AEP and everything that we have to offer there, and it will be directly there. We'll ultimately then run that through the local commissions to seek the necessary approvals to be able to move that forward on behalf of our vertically integrated operating companies.
Joel, care to chime in, or would you like? I have a question queued up for you as well.
No, I think that's good. What other question you got?
All right. So next is how does working through the utility help mitigate risks and reduce the complexity?
Well, I think working with the utility, we know the local areas, and so I think one concern, while we've known Bloom for some time, and as Kevin outlined, Bloom's been around for some time, Bloom hasn't been very active for a number of good reasons, mostly sort of economics and no need for the load growth in some of the Midwest states that we serve in our vertically integrated operating companies. And so there's a level of trust that I think our customers enjoy by working with AEP, to know that they're not dealing with this outsider from outside this jurisdiction or whatnot. They're dealing with AEP, someone that they've dealt with for many years, and that we're here to listen to them and help solve and meet their problems and meet their needs. And so that's what we're here for. We're here to provide that consistent review. And then they also know that there is sort of the commission oversight in their regulated operating jurisdictions that they can take some comfort in.
All right, Kevin, based on the trends in the report that we're sharing here with everyone and what we've discussed today, where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation in distributed gen for data centers and utilities?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest opportunities is how do we create hybrid solutions? So as I mentioned earlier, right, we're transitioning from the grid's transitioning from serving an analog economy to a digital economy, right? And we got to think in new and different ways. So I think hybrid solutions where you can leverage this massive grid infrastructure, right, to deliver power, but then incorporating on-site generation, whether it's fuel cells or it could be solar or it could be energy storage, right? There's a different mix, and a lot of it will be based on what the resources are of the region and how much land's available, right? So could we have solar? Could we have wind? But how do we get everything to work together so we're not just building, massive power plants, gigawatts together, and we've got to move it, thousands and thousands of miles, right? Because I think the big thing for everyone to remember is all of your utility scale generation is typically not where people live, right? So then you got to then run tremendous amounts of transmission to get the generation from where it's being created to where it's being utilized. And I think if we talked about adding in 50, 60 gigawatts of new capacity to contextualize that for people, that's like adding another 10 plus New York cities. It's a tremendous amount of power, right? And just all the infrastructure to move it. If you look at our historical sort of ability to build out infrastructure and transmission lines, if we don't change the way we operate, it would probably take us 50 to 80 years to build all that transmission and distribution infrastructure. So there's just a lot of things that have to change. We have to think differently and creatively in terms of how we solve this problem, because we've never seen one at this scale with this steep of a curve before.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, so this one, we have a couple variations of a similar question that's been asked throughout the Q&A, so I'm going to try to blend them together here. It's basically Microsoft backing out of their billion-dollar data center plan. Why did they elect not to build in New Albany, Ohio, in the AEP territory? What are the implications for broader data center demand? Why not take advantage of Bloom? So, let's dive as deep into some of this, as well as why Amazon also did so, as shown in the Public Utility Commission filings. So I'm going to give you guys let's dive as deep as we can down this one.
Well, sure. I mean, I can speak to, the announcement that has just come out in the last 24 hours about the Microsoft no longer moving forward with their billion-dollar data center here in Ohio. Certainly, we're disappointed to hear that. We were not actively working on any fuel cells with them, but we were excited for their evolution here in central Ohio. And while it is disappointing to sort of see, it is one of those things that we are fully subscribed, and that we have actually a pretty long queue of customers that want generation and want transmission here in central Ohio. And so while we're disappointed to see that Microsoft and we hope that maybe Microsoft changes their plans, but we know that there's plenty of other customers that will certainly soak up that capacity, if it becomes made available. So, there is a queue process. We've got a whole regulatory sort of process around that to make sure that it's done in a fair and equitable way. But we are disappointed to see them come, but it doesn't change the belief that the load growth is here to stay, and that because we've seen plenty of other announcements. And as we're speaking, the stock market's up 6% now all of a sudden, in the last 30 minutes, just because of certain announcements. So I think we live in some volatile times, but I wouldn't take one announcement to suggest that the data center game is over.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we have a couple engineering questions, and just in interest of time, I'm trying to keep them as condensed as possible. So, first, how does the technology look from a space or square footage perspective? How much space would you need to on site to support 2 megawatt lineup? Are you able to stack vertically to conserve space? And then also a separate engineering question about heat reuse.
So there's a couple points there. So first off, as we've continued to explore this time to power and address this market need, we've kind of reevaluated how we deploy the fuel cells. So when we first started, we used to pour concrete pads and we went to precast pads to put the fuel cells on. We now want to move as much of that work into our factory as possible, because really permits are typically the long lead time in terms of us being able to get a site energized. So we now actually mount the fuel cells on skids. So they come in and they're ready just to drop right down. So just picture a couple I-beams, steel plate on top, and we can put the fuel cells on there, and you've got a complete kit ready to go. As part of that configuration, we are able to stack them, so we can do 2 high with um, with no additional construction. We can easily go to 4 or 6 high with a simple, equipment platform, right? It's not going to be, considered occupied space. I don't need fire suppression. It's a relatively quick and easy permitting process. And a way to think of it is when we just we go 4 high, we call it a double stack. We can do 100 megawatts in an acre. So now we're not reaching power densities that are in excess of what you'd otherwise look at from a turbine standpoint. We continue to drive and focus on how we can improve that power density. Was there another part of the question on that one, Melissa?
I think there was some on heat reuse and
Oh, yeah.
recapture.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
We typically, for a lot of our customers, we'll just vent the heat, but we easily can do CHP, and we've been starting to do that, especially for our projects in Europe. But the waste heat coming off the fuel cell is about, north of 300 degrees Celsius. So we can take that and we can either put it into steam, like a steam heat loop if you're in Europe, or we can run it through an absorption chiller and create cold water for the data center to use as part of their cooling needs to further, improve the efficiency of the overall solution and reduce the amount of electric load requirements at the facility.
Okay, so then let's see. When hyperscalers are talking about concerns of not getting power for 3 to 4 years, is that a problem they're facing immediately today? Like they want a data center to come online in 2028. Is there a problem today to support that? Or is it more so a problem of where they're looking that much further ahead that there won't be power going forward?
Yeah. So it depends on location, right? It just depends on where
Mhm.
you're trying to locate that data center. Um, as you know, while we have the largest 765 kV transmission network in the country, there are pockets inside our vertically integrated utilities where there are challenges in delivering large scale energy needs for a data center. And so, if a data center wants to locate in one of those challenging spots, there can be delays in when we can kind of meet their needs. And acutely here in central Ohio, where I'm located, there are, because we've had such a demand for energy, there are a number of those pockets where we've put you on the queue list that I was referring to when I answered the question about Microsoft. That you have to wait until we can build out the transmission network to support your needs. So that is a problem that some customers in certain locations are facing today, and that was the challenge that we were asked to solve, a little over a year ago, and that we came up with the Bloom fuel cell solution. They want the power now, and they want as much of it as they can get. And again, for
Mhm.
some locations, that could be a 7 to 10 year wait, depending on where they're located. So just depends on the size, the scale, and the location that they're looking for. But the grid's been continuously built over years, but not to every location with unlimited power.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, and I don't think we've answered this one yet, but does Bloom offer PPAs for all platform sizes?
We do. So we've been offering our customers PPAs for the past 15 years. So I run our structured finance group. As we mentioned at the beginning, we've raised over $6 billion in non-recourse financing, right? So we don't hold the assets on our balance sheet. We work with, partners such as AEP to, AEP buys the equipment, and then they'll offer the PPAs to our customers. We also work with large, private equity firms, infrastructure investors, U.S. banks. We have a relatively standardized contract. Whether you need a PPA for a megawatt, 2 megawatts, 200 megawatts, we can kind of fit all shapes and sizes.
Okay, we have a couple more. Um, is there experience with fuel cells in following in a load following mode? As there are reports that suggest that the ramp response for fuel cells is generally poor due to their electrochemical nature, both preventing fast load ramping and damaging fuel cell life.
Sure. So, as you know, there's a couple parts to that question. So, if we're gonna operate in a load following situation, so we're gonna either operate in a microgrid or an islanded situation, what we'll do is we'll also install ultracapacitors as part of our solution. So, which is a form of short duration energy storage that can have high discharge rates. So what we'll do is we'll incorporate ultracaps into the overall solution, and that way, if you do have an immediate spike with your loads, right? So if you have AI training loads and they go up and down, the ultracaps can handle that immediate spike, and then the fuel cells will quickly ramp up to then follow from there. So, we do recognize there are certain limitations, and that's where we integrate in other technologies such that we can meet the customer needs. When we've been looking at it, we actually haven't seen any material differences on the fuel cell degradation when we operate in our standard, historical kind of like grid parallel configuration, where we just do steady base load versus operating in a load following mode. So, we've actually found the fuel cell to be extremely resilient in those types of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we had so many more questions that we didn't quite get time to. We're nearing the top of the hour. So I do want to thank everyone who's joined us. I especially want to thank you two, Kevin and Joel, for sharing all of your expertise with us. So I know that you are both likely going to get a lot more feedback and comments and inquiry through LinkedIn or other email or social platforms. And to everyone, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for all of your inquiries and curiosity about this really important subject. And let's keep this conversation going.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So,
All right. Thanks all.
Take care.